Hey everyone, welcome to the program WRSA Radio. I am your host, Grenadier One. As always, I hope you're having a good week. I'm doing well, still on the hunt for a new home. I have some plans to go tour a couple of places this weekend, so that should be interesting. It's always kind of interesting going into a potential place. But anyway. I have a couple of things to cover this week, so we're going to move a little bit away from the conflict in Ukraine after I do a kind of a quick rundown of the situation and some of the things related to our position here in the U.S., because let's face it, that is really all we have to be focused on at this point. We want to watch these international geopolitical things because they influence what's happening here, but there's really very little that we can actually do to influence them. So it's more of a, taking information as it comes to us. So Ukraine is progressing much like we thought it would. At the time of this writing, the Russians are still building for the major assault on Kyiv. There's that 40-mile long convoy of Russian vehicles, which is northwest of the city, coming in from Belarus, and that in and of itself is a marker of what the Ukrainians are actually able to do. In a conflict with NATO, where air and artillery situation would be, still a toss-up, or at least, much different than what it is in Ukraine, or with Ukraine, there's no way the Russians would risk a 40-mile long convoy. That would be a 40-mile burning hulk of targets. And an air defense umbrella. They would just have to concentrate so much stuff there to try to prevent stuff like that from happening. It just wouldn't happen. They would be taking a massive risk, even with a 2-mile long convoy. So this points to the inability of Ukraine to really be able to project force beyond the very local tactical level. They still can act. They still can do things. They still have the drones, but they're not able to do very much to stop the Russians from putting that many vehicles in one place. The fact that they're still doing it, kind of like I said, points to a failure on their part, but and the progress of the war. Now the progress is rather slow for the Russians, and they're taking casualties, and the losses of vehicle and material is piling up. But they just continue to slowly slog forward. It looks like my initial projections of 2 weeks were probably a little more accurate and actually more in line with the Russians' planning even. It was reported that a Russian colonel, I believe, I think he was a naval infantry colonel, so their Marine Force or Marine Corps, that he was captured along the coast by Ukrainian forces, and he actually had written plans and documents of his orders in his possession. Bad on his part. And these have been shown on, photographs and pictures of them. So there's, pretty high level of assurance that those are accurate. The orders indicate that the Russians were given their operational command back in January, actually, to begin deployment and movement for this operation, and that they were planning for 15 days for the initial phases. That they were trying to accomplish some objectives quickly, but they were still planning for contingencies for this longer kind of thing going on. I still believe that they are behind schedule and that they were expecting the Ukrainians to collapse sooner than they have. I suspect that they were thinking they would be more or less in control at this point, and the second week would be more of mop-up and occupation and sort of dealing with the small contingencies and things. At any rate, the big long convoy is mostly supply vehicles, and per Russian doctrine, they mass their supplies in this large point, at a point that they consider to be a safe distance from their objectives. But it looks very much like they've centered their final effort on that drive to Kyiv, and it's on a single axis. And they may be neglecting the other areas of the operation from a supply standpoint, because we've seen videos of Russians looting the grocery stores and even robbing a bank. It's just truly a bizarre situation. Over the last 24 to 36 hours, there have been some developments that I think we have to highlight because it points to the possibility of the war spreading. Out in the Black Sea, we had a Romanian MiG-21 crash. Now, there are conflicting reports about what happened, at least in terms of what the MiG was doing. Reportedly, it was escorting a Ukrainian fighter that was heading back to a Ukrainian airbase, and not really sure about that. Like I said, that there was sort of conflicting information about what that Ukrainian plane was doing in Romania or why it needed escorting. But at any rate, it crashed in what was reported to be marginal weather. So could be weather related, could be mechanical, but it could be something else as well, because later in the day, a search and rescue chopper that was sent to look for the pilot also went down. So either the weather was so bad they should not have been flying, the Romanians have poor care and feeding of their flying machines, or the Russians are shooting them down. Now, I no idea what it is, which one of those options it is, but when you put that together with multiple neutral cargo ships in the Black Sea being shot at and hit, including one actually sinking, it looks very much like the Russian Navy's possibly just blasting anything that they think might be a potential threat. So, like I said, we don't know exactly what it is, but at any rate, why is this a big deal? Well, one of the ships that was hit was a Turkish-flagged cargo ship. And Turkey's already thrown in on the side of Ukraine, at least indirectly, by giving them the drones, the Bayraktar drones that they were very successful with in Armenia. Those drones are flown remotely via satellite, and that remote ground station that does all the command could be anywhere, and it very well could have been on that Turkish ship. The Russians may have located the signal using radio intercept and then fired on it. Now, that's speculation on my part, but keep in mind the Ukrainians didn't have much of a navy to begin with, and it was knocked out, or at least made operationally inactive very early in the fight. So who is doing the shooting out there in the water, and what the heck are they shooting at? All of this adds up to a potential for escalation. The wrong ships get hit, or more semi-neutral aircraft go down, and some nation may throw in behind Ukraine, and this thing starts to spread. We have word today that the Russians might potentially be bringing in troops from Kazakhstan. The Belarusians are perhaps mobilizing. They've been kind of given some indications that they're ready to move across the border themselves. So this thing is really starting to spin up, and it's a danger that we will just have to continue to watch, because like I've said before in the last couple of episodes, the information that's coming out is very, very dark and foggy. So anyway, moving on to some other items that I want to cover. So I mentioned that this past Saturday there was going to be a communication class at NC Renegade's place over in Murphy, North Carolina, and that you should attend if you could. Well, I spent Saturday with that event, and it was very good. The class was about 20 people. I knew most of them from previous events, but there were a few that I had not met before, so that was good. It was good to see some people that I had not seen since COVID hit. Some of these folks I knew, but like I said, had not seen them in a good while. So that alone was worth the trip for me. I don't want to reteach the class here. I just want to hit a couple of things that came out of that course. Some items that people may not consider or may not have ever really given any thought to. It seems that people came to the course, or some of them did at least, with the expectation that it was going to be mostly about radios and gear. What you need, what you should avoid, that kind of thing. And there was some of that information, but that was not really the focus of the course. When we hear the word communications, at least in the prepper or the patriot community, there seems to be this focus on, or this automatic leap to, this is about radios. Well, That's not the case, and that's only a small part of that whole subject. So there's so much more that was not covered in the course because it was not the intent to do so. It was really a primer, and it was only about 3 or 4 hours. But communications encompasses a lot of different components, and much as I've spoken to in the past, gear or equipment is the least important aspect of that. Equipment allows us to have some capabilities, but it doesn't necessarily dictate our ability, or a lack of gear may inhibit things that we can do. But really, what it means is that we have to determine a different method of communicating. What's more important, as with most of these subjects, is our mindset and our awareness. The biggest lesson that came out of the course, or comes out of courses like this, is that often it's more important to listen than it is to transmit. And I mean that in all aspects of the words, by the way. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, right? So it was a good primer course, and I want to thank David from NC Renegade for putting that on, and I hope a few of you were able to make it out there. Let us know, would you like more of those types of events in the future? Because I think the importance of meeting face-to-face cannot be stressed enough here. Which brings me to kind of the negatives of the course, because a couple of things happen that I want to touch on as lessons learned. It's important when we do these things that we do a lessons learned, even if it's not really a formal thing. It just lets us plan better for the next event. So anyway, the first thing I want to touch on is that a couple showed up to the course, and after a very short time, they got up and they left. And they spoke to one of the organizers and told them, that the class was just a little too basic for them, as they had a lot of experience. Now, I don't want to disparage this couple. I didn't get a chance to really meet them or speak to them, so I don't know much about them. I don't know how far they had traveled to get there, but I have to imagine that if it was far, they would have probably stayed. I can't imagine driving for like 2 hours and staying for an hour and then leaving. But, it's possible that there was another issue and they were being discreet. So, I don't know the whole situation, and I'm not trying to come down on them. What I wanted to highlight, however, is that you may be in a similar frame of mind about an event or a course. You may even decide that you're not even going to attend something because you look at it and you say, well, I know all that already, so I'm not going to that. Well, okay, but let me present a little bit of a different perspective to you. Maybe the class would benefit from your attendance, because it's entirely possible that you do have a ton of experience and information to contribute to the course. And just because someone is instructing a course does not mean that they have a full comprehension of all aspects of a subject. They're presenting from their own training and their own experience, and that may be focused in a very specific way, and it may miss other aspects of the subject that you may know a lot about. So I would encourage you to reach out to the instructor and let them know that you plan on attending the class and what your level of experience is, and maybe work with them. They might want to ask you to, provide your perspective in a little short segment or something like that. But make sure you go anyway, And that's, provided, of course, that the group of people that are going to be there, prospective being there, are people that you want to get to know, because the real focus of these types of events is not so much the information that's being transferred from instructors to students, although that has that is important. It's the interaction and the face-to-face meeting between all of the people that are involved. Now, as I mentioned, I knew most of the people from this particular event, from other things that we had done before, and their attendance there. And that builds rapport and it builds recognition between us, and it means that we have a much better understanding of what we're all capable of and kind of what each of us is about. So when you decide not to attend an event, or you focus on just what the subject is, you're missing out on the other aspects of what's taking place there. So anyway, just keep that in mind when you see something come up. Now, the second situation that occurred is a little more of a sore spot, and I want to say up front that I can very much respect both sides of this, and I don't want to upset anyone who may be listening that were involved. I can see the points, and I think it was a situation that probably should not have become a problem, but people are people, and sometimes, egos get into the way of things. But at any rate, I want you to step back and understand that we live in a very crazy time, and those of us who are setting up events like this, or even, for example, when I tell people that I'm going to go to a park and do a practice hike, we're taking a risk. We're risking that someone may see that as an opportunity to approach us and potentially cause a problem. And like it or not, that means that we have to be very cautious about the people who show up and, to the things that we're putting on. When I do these kinds of things, I tend to do them at neutral public locations so that it mitigates some of that risk. But I'm always armed just in case, okay? Well, NC Renegade is going a bit further in that he's inviting people to come to a facility that he operates. It's much closer and personal. So when he brings people into that environment, it's understandable that he's going to be a little more sensitive to who they are and what the nature of the engagement is. Now, there were two rules for this event that David had set in place. One was that cell phones were to be left in the vehicles. And I think most of you know why that would be, and nobody had really any issues with that. The second rule was that unless David knew you already, no firearms were to be carried. He didn't want people that he did not know showing up carrying a firearm. They could just leave it in their vehicle. Well, there was one person who had an issue with this, and as I said, I can completely understand this. I hope he's listening to this and will see things from David's perspective, his side of the situation, so that he will attend future events. However, he decided that he did not want to participate, and he didn't want to leave his personal weapon in his car, and so he left the event. Everything I mentioned previously about contributing to the course and missing out on that face-to-face aspect still stands for this. I can, recognize that people will feel very strong about this one way or the other, but I want you to consider something. I'm a rifle instructor. I've ran more classes on basic rifle and fundamental of shooting than I can remember. And for every one of those classes, our primary rule was no live ammunition in the classroom. And that included in weapons, so personal weapons. For those events, I left my personal carry gun in a bag stored, away from the class. I could get it if I needed it, but it was not in the immediate room, immediate vicinity of the course. And no one ever complained about this, and we all kind of recognized that it was a reasonable request for the safety of the situation, and it helps prevent accidents. So I think we all can recognize that there are times that we have to make some concessions and come to an understanding. I don't want to get more into this specific situation, but I wanted to point it out because I think this is kind of emblematic of something that gets in the way of a lot of the things that we try to do. We all want to have principles and stick to our principles, and that's something that is sorely lacking in the world right now. But what we have to recognize is that others have principles and their beliefs as well, and that often times those things will bump against one another. We have to be able to come to a compromise when small and slight infringements, can be accepted and worked out, so that we can interact with one another and kind of focus on the larger, more dangerous threats that we are collectively facing. Demanding ideological purity is getting in the way of us organizing and forming alliances. So we have to see that when we go into someone's home that we're entering under their rules, and while we may not agree with them, we have to weigh the aspects of deciding not to go or setting aside an inconvenience to achieve something more productive. In this case, the individual decided that he would rather leave than to place his carry gun in his car. And as I said, I can respect that, and I don't disparage him for this, but I wish that he had made a concession for this one time and took advantage of the course because I believe that he missed out and we missed out for not having him there, building a better relationship with him. But anyway, give those things some thoughts and give me some feedback over on Gab. Come see us over on the mothership. That's all I got time for today, folks. Like and subscribe, and I will see you on the next episode.